Officer Sarah Mitchell noticed it first during a routine school pickup at Lambrook. A series of hand signals so subtle that most people would miss them entirely. Princess Charlotte, 9 years old, standing near the car with her fingers positioned in what looked like random fidgeting. But Sarah had been in royal protection for 15 years. She recognized patterns where others saw chaos. The little princess touched her ear twice, tapped her shoulder, crossed her arms briefly before dropping them. Each movement quick, natural, easily dismissed as a child being restless after a long school day. But Prince George's protection officer immediately shifted position, scanned the perimeter, checked the vehicles in the parking area with renewed intensity. Sarah's radio remained silent. No alerts, no threats. Nothing unusual reported, yet something had just happened. A message had been sent and received, and Sarah hadn't understood a single word of it. She watched Charlotte climb into the car, chattering normally with her brother about homework and football practice. The girl's face showed no concern, no fear. Just the typical expression of a child heading home after school. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd witnessed something extraordinary, something that had been happening right under the noses of the entire protection team. Before we continue with what Sarah discovered, if you're enjoying this story about royal secrets and the incredible bond between siblings, please hit that subscribe button. We bring you the most fascinating, untold stories from inside the royal world. That evening, Sarah filed a routine report. Nothing alarming. Just an observation that Princess Charlotte seemed to have developed some repetitive movements that might warrant attention. Perhaps anxiety. Perhaps just a phase. The next morning, she received a message to report to the head of Royal Protection immediately. Commander. James Harding's office overlooked the Thames. He was reading Sarah's report when she entered, his expression unreadable. Officer Mitchell, you've been assigned to the Wales children for 3 years now. Would you say you understand their behavioral patterns? Yes, sir. I believe I do. Then explain to me why in the past 6 months. There have been 17 instances where Princess Charlotte made unusual hand movements, immediately before her brother's protection detail adjusted their positions. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. 17 instances. Someone had been tracking this far longer than she'd been noticing it. I only became aware of it yesterday, sir. We've been aware for 2 months. He pulled up security footage on his computer. Watch this. School pickup, September 15th. The video showed Charlotte waiting by the car. She glanced at the street, then touched her right ear while her left hand brushed her coat pocket. 30 seconds later, George's lead protection officer repositioned himself between the prince and a photographer who'd approached the school fence. Now this one. October 3rd. Charlotte, walking between classes, stumbled slightly. Her hand shot out to steady herself against the wall, but her fingers formed a specific shape. A shape that looked accidental until you saw what happened next. 2 protection officers immediately converged on George's location, creating a tighter perimeter. Are you suggesting she's deliberately signaling? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm showing you what we've documented. A 9-year-old girl who appears to have developed her own security alert system, a system that her brother's protection team has been responding to, apparently instinctively, without even realizing they're doing it. He closed the laptop and looked at Sarah directly. The question is why? Is she seeing threats we're missing? Is this anxiety manifesting as hypervigilance? Or is there something else happening here? Sarah thought about Charlotte, the quiet, observant princess who often seemed older than her years, the girl who watched everything, noticed everything, processed everything with an intensity that sometimes made the protection officers uncomfortable. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted, Princess Charlotte is protecting her brother. She's created a language that lets her communicate danger without causing panic, without drawing attention, without making George feel afraid. Commander Harding was quiet for a moment. That's exactly what I think too. Which means we have 2 options. We can shut it down. Explain to her that security is our job, not hers. Or we can learn her language. Sarah finished. Learning the language of a 9-year-old. Princess seems rather irregular. so is having a 9-year-old. Princess, who's apparently better at spotting threats than some of our trained officers. Commander Harding smiled slightly. Your assignment has changed, Officer Mitchell. As of today, you're Princess Charlotte's primary detail. Your job is to understand what she's seeing, why she's seeing it, and whether her instincts are as good as they appear to be. And if they are, then we have a serious problem, because it means threats are getting close enough for a child to notice them before we do. Sarah left the office with her mind racing. She'd been assigned to protect a little girl who was already protecting her brother. A child who'd taught herself surveillance, threat assessment, and silent communication without any training. The question wasn't whether Charlotte was remarkable. The question was what had made her become this way. What had this 9-year-old seen or experienced that convinced her she needed to create her own security system? And more importantly, what threats was she seeing that the professionals were missing? Sarah was about to find out that Princess Charlotte's abilities went far beyond simple hand signals. The little princess had been preparing for something. Something she believed was coming. Something no one else had noticed yet. Asterisk. Sarah's first day as Charlotte's primary detail started like any other morning at Adelaide Cottage. The princess emerged in her school uniform, backpack perfectly organized, hair neatly brushed. She smiled politely at Sarah. It's the same smile she gave every protection officer. But as they walked to the car, Charlotte's left hand brushed against her right wrist. 3 light taps. So quick, Sarah almost missed it. George's officer immediately checked the surrounding vehicles. Nothing unusual. But the movement had been noted, logged somewhere in the man's trained instincts. Sarah decided to try something. As Charlotte reached for the car door, Sarah positioned herself differently than usual, closer, more protective. A subtle change that a child might not notice. Charlotte noticed. Her eyes met Sarah's for just a moment. A flash of recognition, understanding. Then the mask of a normal 9-year-old slipped back into place. New officer today? Charlotte asked pleasantly. I'll be with you more regularly now, Your Royal Highness. To Charlotte is fine when it's just us. She climbed into the car. Do you know sign language? The question seemed casual. A child making conversation. But Sarah heard the real question underneath. Some basic alphabet and common phrases. I'm learning it at school. We have a deaf student in year 4, and some of us wanted to be able to talk to her. Charlotte buckled her seatbelt. It's amazing how much you can say without speaking. How many conversations happen that most people never see. Sarah met Charlotte's eyes in the rearview mirror. The princess looked away first, but not before Sarah saw the intelligence there. The calculation. At school, Sarah observed from her designated position. She watched Charlotte interact with classmates, completely normal on the surface. Playing, laughing, participating in lessons visible through the classroom windows. But every 15 minutes, like clockwork, Charlotte would glance at where George was supposed to be. His classroom was in a different building, out of her direct sight line. Yet somehow she seemed to know if he was where he should be. During morning break, Sarah saw it happen in real time. Charlotte was playing football with friends when she suddenly stopped. Her hand went to her hair, tucking a strand behind her ear in a way that looked completely natural. Within seconds, George's detail had shifted. One officer moved toward the school's east entrance, another repositioned to have a better view of the parking area. Sarah followed their line of sight. A delivery van had pulled up. Wrong time for deliveries. Wrong entrance. The driver was checking his phone, seemingly lost. Nothing inherently threatening, but unusual enough to warrant attention. The van left after 2 minutes. Charlotte resumed playing as if nothing had happened. Sarah requested the security logs from the past month. She cross-referenced Charlotte's documented signals with actual security events. The pattern was undeniable. 17 times Charlotte had signaled. 17 times, something unusual had occurred within 5 minutes of her signal. Not always threats. Sometimes just irregularities. A parent arriving at the wrong pickup time. A maintenance worker in an unexpected location. A photographer using a longer lens than usual. Things that the protection team would eventually notice. But Charlotte noticed them first. At lunch, Sarah found herself standing near Charlotte and her friends. The girls were discussing a class project about coding and computer programming. "My mom says knowing code is like having a secret language," one girl said. "You can make computers do whatever you want if you know how to talk to them properly." Charlotte was quiet, methodically eating her sandwich. Then she spoke, her voice thoughtful. "I think all language is code, really. We use sounds and symbols to represent ideas. Change the code, and you change what you can express. Sometimes you need a private code, one that only specific people understand." Sarah's radio crackled. George's officer requesting a perimeter check. Routine, nothing concerning. But Charlotte had stopped eating. Her right hand rested on the table, fingers positioned in a way that looked relaxed, but wasn't. She was listening, waiting. The radio crackled again. All clear. Charlotte resumed eating. After school, as Sarah drove Charlotte home, the princess was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. "Officer, Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. If you saw something that worried you, but you weren't sure if it was really dangerous or just your imagination, would you tell someone?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I think trusting your instincts is important, especially when it comes to safety." "What kind of thing are you worried about?" Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "There's a man. He's been at the school 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Different days. He doesn't have children there. He just watches. From his car across the street." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What does he look like?" "Gray hair, blue car. He wears sunglasses even when it's cloudy. And he has a camera, but he doesn't take pictures of the school. He takes pictures of the security officers, of where they stand. When they change shifts. Have you told anyone else about this?" Charlotte shook her head. "I told George I had a funny feeling and that he should stay near his officer. I didn't want to scare him with details. And I thought maybe I was being silly. Maybe the man is a bird watcher or something, and I'm just being paranoid." "You're not being paranoid. You're being observant. That's different. George doesn't notice these things. He's good at so many things I'm not good at. Sports and making friends and not worrying about stuff. But he doesn't see patterns like I do. He doesn't notice when things are out of place." Sarah pulled the car into Adelaide Cottage's driveway. "Charlotte, what you're describing isn't normal childhood observation. Someone taught you this? Or something happened that made you learn it?" Charlotte unbuckled her seatbelt, but didn't move to exit the car. When she spoke, her voice was smaller, younger. "After Grandma Diana died, before I was born, bad people tried to hurt the family. Photographers who chased cars. People who broke into places they shouldn't be. Mummy explained it to me when I asked why we always have officers with us. She said the world isn't always safe for people like us. That we have to be smart and careful. Your mother is right. But being careful is our job, not yours. But what if your job isn't enough?" Charlotte looked at Sarah with eyes that had seen too much for a 9-year-old. "What if something happens, and I could have prevented it by paying attention? George is going to be king someday. He's important. More important than me. That's not true, it is true. And it's okay. It just means I have to help keep him safe. Someone has to." Sarah made a decision. "The man in the blue car? If you see him again, you use one of your signals. The ear tap. I'll see it, and I'll respond appropriately. But Charlotte, you need to promise me something." "What?" "Your brother needs you to be his sister, not his bodyguard. You can help us by being observant, but you can't carry the weight of his safety on your shoulders. That's too heavy for anyone your age." Charlotte nodded, but Sarah wasn't sure she believed it. What Sarah didn't know was that Charlotte had been documenting everything in a notebook hidden in her room. Dates, times, descriptions of every unusual occurrence she'd noticed in the past year. The blue car man was just the latest entry. And tomorrow, he was going to make a move that would prove Charlotte's instincts were more than just childhood anxiety. They were survival skills that were about to be tested in ways no one expected. The blue car appeared at 8:45 the next morning. Same location across from Lambrook School. Same gray-haired man behind the wheel. Same camera, though today he wasn't bothering to hide it. Sarah spotted him the moment the security team arrived with the children. She'd already briefed Commander Harding overnight. Every protection officer on site has been given the vehicle description in order to log any movement. Charlotte saw him too. Sarah watched the little princess's shoulders tense for just a second before she forced them to relax. The girl's training of herself was remarkable. Most adults couldn't control their fear responses that well. As the children walked toward the school entrance, Charlotte's hand went to her right ear. 2 taps. The signal Sarah now understood meant known threat. Eyes on location. George's officer adjusted his position without consciously knowing why. Muscle memory, responding to months of conditioning from Charlotte's subtle warnings, Sarah spoke quietly into her radio. Subject in blue vehicle, northeast position. I have visual, confirmed, came the response. Maintaining observation. The morning passed normally on the surface. Lessons, break time, lunch. But Sarah noticed Charlotte checking the windows more frequently than usual. The girl's attention was divided between her schoolwork and whatever she was monitoring outside at 1:15. During afternoon lessons, Charlotte raised her hand to ask to use the bathroom. Her teacher nodded. Charlotte walked out with the calm demeanor of a child on a routine errand. Sarah followed at a discreet distance, as protocol required. But Charlotte didn't go to the bathroom. She went to a window at the end of the corridor. A window with a clear view of the parking area and the street beyond. The blue car had moved. It was now parked closer to the school's west entrance. The entrance used for afternoon pickup. The entrance where less security coverage naturally existed, because it wasn't the primary exit. Charlotte's hands gripped the windowsill. Sarah saw the girl's breathing quicken slightly. Fear. Real fear, not just caution. Charlotte, Sarah said quietly, approaching. The princess turned. He's going to do something today. I don't know what, but he's positioning himself differently. He's waited and watched and learned our patterns. And now, he's going to act. How do you know? Because that's what I would do. If I were planning something, I'd watch first. Learn the routines. Find the gaps. Then I'd make my move when the gaps were widest. Sarah looked at this 9-year-old girl who was thinking like a security analyst. We need to tell your father. We need to protect George first. He has football practice after school today. That west entrance is where they bring out the sports equipment. He'll be distracted, happy, not paying attention. That's when someone would strike. Sarah made a command decision. She called Commander Harding directly. Sir, Princess Charlotte has identified a tactical concern regarding this afternoon's schedule. I believe we need to implement emergency protocols. Based on what intelligence? Sarah looked at Charlotte. Based on pattern recognition and threat assessment from an unusually reliable source. There was a pause. You're telling me we're changing security protocols based on the observations of a 9-year-old? I'm telling you that this 9-year-old has been right 17 times in a row about security irregularities. And today, she's scared. That's new. Another pause. Protocols updated. Additional officers deploying to west entrance. And Mitchell? If this is a false alarm, we're going to have a very interesting conversation about appropriate use of resources.
Understood, sir.
Charlotte had been listening. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. I don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing trouble. You're doing exactly what you should do when something feels wrong. At 3:30, as students poured out for after-school activities, the security presence at the west entrance had quietly tripled. 2 casual observers, nothing seemed different. But every exit point was now covered by trained officers with clear sight lines and rapid response capabilities. George emerged with his football teammates, laughing about something, completely unaware of the increased security. Charlotte watched from a classroom window, Sarah beside her. The blue car remained parked. The man inside made no move. 5 minutes passed. 10. George's practice moved to the field. The children began their warm-up exercises. Maybe I was wrong, Charlotte whispered. Maybe he's just a photographer after all. Or maybe the increased security changed his plan. At 3:45. The man started his car. He drove slowly past the school, camera raised, taking photos of the new security positions. Then he accelerated and disappeared around the corner, Sarah's radio exploded with chatter. Subject vehicle departing. Units in pursuit. License plate captured. Commander Harding's voice cut through. All units, subject is flagged in database. Suspected press agent with history of harassment complaints from multiple public figures. Maintain pursuit, but do not engage unless he stops near royal residences. The man wasn't a terrorist. He was a photographer, but one who'd been stalking the children's patterns, looking for unguarded moments to capture unauthorized photos that tabloids would pay thousands for. Not life-threatening, but exactly the kind of predatory behavior that Charlotte had been trained by harsh experience to recognize. Sarah looked at the princess. You were right. He was a threat. Maybe not the kind of threat you feared, but someone who shouldn't have been there. I feel stupid, Charlotte said quietly. I thought he was dangerous. I scared everyone over a photographer. Charlotte, listen to me. That photographer knew our security patterns. He'd been studying us for weeks, looking for vulnerabilities. If he'd found one, if he'd gotten an unauthorized photo of your brother, it would have shown other people exactly where our weak points are. You identified a threat to operational security. That's not stupid. That's professional level observation. The little princess didn't look comforted. But I was so scared. I thought something terrible was going to happen. Sarah knelt down to Charlotte's eye level. Fear is your brain trying to protect you. You felt fear because your instincts recognized a pattern that meant danger. Those instincts were correct. The level of danger was different than you expected, but the threat was real. George doesn't get scared like I do. George has you watching out for him. That's why he doesn't need to be scared. That evening, Catherine and William requested a private meeting with Sarah. They sat in Adelaide Cottage's living room while the children did homework upstairs. Commander Harding briefed us, William said. He tells us our daughter has been running her own intelligence operation for months. She's been observant, sir. Unusually so. Catherine leaned forward. Sarah, we need to understand something. Is Charlotte's behavior normal anxiety that's manifesting as hypervigilance? Or is she actually seeing things we should be concerned about? Sarah chose her words carefully. I think Princess Charlotte has an exceptional ability to recognize patterns and identify anomalies. Whether that's natural talent or learned behavior, I can't say. But she's not paranoid. She's not imagining threats. She's noticing details that many trained officers miss. She's 9 years old, Catherine said, and her voice broke slightly. She should be worried about school tests and friendship drama, not stalking photographers and security vulnerabilities. I agree, but the reality is that your daughter has developed these skills. The question is whether we acknowledge them and channel them appropriately, or ignore them and risk making her feel dismissed when she notices something genuinely dangerous. William was quiet for a long moment. When I was young, after my mother died, I became hyper-aware of everything around me. Every camera, every stranger, every unexpected noise. I thought it was just anxiety. But my protection officers told me later that several times my anxiety had actually identified real security concerns. He looked at his wife. Charlotte is doing what I did. She's trying to control an environment that feels inherently unsafe by being vigilant. By watching, by creating systems that let her feel like she has some power. So what do? Catherine asked. Sarah had been thinking about this all day. We teach her properly. If she's going to be observant, we give her the tools to understand what she's observing. We help her distinguish between real threats and normal life. We let her help, but we don't let her carry the burden alone. What Sarah didn't say was that Charlotte's abilities were far beyond what could be taught. The girl had an instinct, a gift for reading situations. And tomorrow, they were going to discover just how deep that gift went. Because Charlotte's notebook contained 17 more entries. 17 more observations that no one else had noticed yet, and at least 3 of them were going to turn out to be far more serious than a stalking photographer. Charlotte brought the notebook to Sarah 3 days later. Navy blue, small enough to fit in a school backpack filled with careful handwriting and sketches. You should see this, Charlotte said simply, handing it over during morning break. I've been keeping track. Sarah opened it. The first page was dated 6 months earlier. Entry after entry, each documenting something Charlotte had noticed. Times, descriptions, outcomes. The photographer in the blue car was entry number 18, but it was entry number 4 that made Sarah's blood run cold. Woman in green coat, parking lot attendant at shopping center, November 3rd. Asked me questions about school schedule while Mummy was paying. Seemed too interested in what days we go, what times. Said she had a daughter who might attend there, but no daughter was with her, and she was wearing a staff uniform, but her name badge was blank. Sarah flipped through more pages. Entry 7. Same woman, different coat, at the park, November 10th. Pretended to be jogging. Stopped near our security team. Asked one of the officers about shift schedules. Said she was writing a school paper about royal protection. But she looked too old to be in school. Entry 12. Man with dog at the same park 3 weeks in a row. Always Wednesday at 4. George's football practice time. Dog is never on a leash, even though signs say it's required. Uses the dog as excuse to walk near the field. Takes photos of his dog, but angle includes us in background. Sarah looked up at Charlotte. Have you told anyone about these? I told George to stay close to his officers. I told Louis not to talk to strangers, but he's only 5 and doesn't really understand. I thought about telling Mummy, but she worries so much already. And I wasn't sure if I was just being paranoid. Charlotte, this is exactly the kind of information we need. These aren't coincidences. This is surveillance. But they're always friendly. They smile. They seem normal. Maybe I'm just suspicious of everyone now. Sarah closed the notebook and looked directly at Charlotte. I need you to understand something. Normal people don't repeatedly show up near royal children with excuses to get close. Normal parents don't ask detailed questions about school schedules. These behaviors are reconnaissance. And reconnaissance comes before action. Charlotte's face paled. You think someone is planning to hurt George? I think someone is gathering information. What they plan to do with it, I don't know. But we're going to find out. Within an hour, every entry in Charlotte's notebook was being investigated by Royal Protection Services. The woman in the green coat was identified from shopping center security footage. Former employee of a tabloid newspaper known for paying for inside. Information about royal family movements. The man with the dog was more concerning. No social media presence. No clear employment. No obvious reason to be in that specific location at that specific time. Every week except when it coincided with George's football practice. Commander Harding assembled a meeting that afternoon. Sarah, William, Catherine, and 3 senior protection officers. We have a problem, Harding began. Princess Charlotte has documented multiple instances of what appears to be coordinated surveillance over the past 6 months. We missed all of it. She caught all of it. William looked shaken. How is that possible? You have trained professionals watching my children every moment they're in public. We're trained to spot immediate threats. Weapons, aggressive behavior, security breaches. We're not necessarily watching for someone who appears normal but shows up too frequently in different locations. That requires pattern recognition over long periods. Your daughter has been doing longitudinal surveillance detection on her own. Catherine was reading through the notebook, her hand over her mouth. She's 9 years old. She should be writing about her friends and school projects, not tracking potential stalkers. Mrs. Wales, Sarah said gently, Charlotte is doing this because she feels responsible for keeping George safe. If we tell her to stop, she won't stop. She'll just stop telling us what she sees. We need to work with her, not against her. What are you proposing? William asked. We teach her properly. We show her what real threats look like versus normal behavior. We give her appropriate channels to report concerns. And most importantly, we acknowledge that she has a skill that could be valuable if properly guided. You want to train my 9-year-old daughter as an intelligence asset? I want to teach your daughter how to be a child who happens to be observant, rather than a child who feels like she has to carry adult responsibilities alone. William looked at Catherine. An entire conversation passed between them in silence. Finally, William nodded. Set it up. But Sarah, if this makes things worse, if it increases her anxiety or makes her feel more burdened, then we stop immediately. I promise. The next morning, Sarah sat with Charlotte in a quiet room at Kensington Palace. A security consultant named Dr. Rebecca Martinez joined them. Rebecca specialized in teaching situational awareness to higher-risk individuals, including journalists, diplomats, and corporate executives. "Charlotte," Rebecca began, "your father tells me you're very good at noticing things. I'd like to talk to you about the difference between helpful noticing and worry that doesn't serve you." Charlotte sat up straighter, attentive. "Okay, let's play a game. I'm going to describe some situations, and you tell me if you think they're worth noticing or just normal life." Ready. A man sits on a park bench reading a newspaper. He's there when you arrive and still there when you leave. Charlotte thought about it. Depends. Is he actually reading? Is he turning pages? Or is he holding the paper at an angle where he could be watching over it? Rebecca smiled. Very good. That's exactly the kind of detail that matters. What else would you look for? Does he have anything with him that suggests he's there for a reason? Coffee cup, dog, lunch? Or is the newspaper his only prop? Excellent. Now, a woman in a shopping center asks your mother about your school. Red flag or normal conversation? Red flag if she asks specific questions. What time do you drop them off? What days do they have activities? But maybe normal if she just says something general like, do your children enjoy their school? Rebecca looked impressed. Charlotte, you have very good instincts. But I notice you're analyzing every situation as potentially threatening. That must be exhausting. Charlotte's confident expression faltered. Sometimes I can't stop. I see someone and my brain starts listing all the reasons they might be dangerous. I know it's probably silly, but I can't make it stop. It's not silly. Your brain is trying to protect you and your family, but we can teach it to be more selective, to notice important things without turning everything into a threat. They've spent 2 hours working through scenarios. Rebecca taught Charlotte the difference between healthy awareness and hypervigilance. Showed her how to assess context, evaluate genuine risk factors, and most importantly, how to trust the adults around her to handle situations appropriately. The goal, Rebecca explained, isn't to make you stop noticing things. It's to help you understand what's worth worrying about and what you can let go. You can be observant without carrying the weight of everyone's safety. By the end of the session, Charlotte looked lighter somehow, as if she'd been waiting for someone to tell her it was okay not to be on guard every moment. That evening, Sarah found Charlotte reading in her room. How do you feel about today? Better. Dr. Martinez didn't make me feel crazy. She said my brain is doing what it's supposed to do, just maybe a bit too much. And Charlotte, I want you to know something. Your observations helped us identify real problems. You have a gift, but gifts shouldn't become burdens. Charlotte closed her book. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you think George knows what I've been doing? Watching for him. I think George knows his sister loves him very much. That's what he needs to know. I don't want him to be scared. That's why I created the signals instead of just telling him everything I see. If he knew how many things I worry about, he'd be scared all the time too. Sarah sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed. What if we changed the system? What if instead of you signaling to George's officers, you signaled to me? I'm always nearby. I can receive your observations and handle them appropriately. That way you're helping without having to carry the full responsibility. Charlotte considered this. Would you really pay attention? Even if I'm wrong sometimes? Especially if you're wrong sometimes. Better to check 10 false alarms than miss one real threat. They worked out a new system together. Simpler signals. Clear meanings. Charlotte would observe and report. Sarah would assess and act. The burden would be shared. What neither of them knew was that entry number 15 in Charlotte's notebook was about to become urgently relevant. A maintenance worker who'd been at both Adelaide Cottage and Kensington Palace on different occasions. Always with legitimate-looking work orders. Always asking casual questions about family schedules. A maintenance worker who didn't actually work for any of the companies that serviced royal properties, and tomorrow he was scheduled to appear at Lambrook School for an emergency heating repair that would place him. Inside the building for the first time, Charlotte saw the maintenance van pull up at 9:15 the next morning. She was in history class, but her seat was positioned where she could see the parking area, a habit she'd developed. Always choosing seats with views of exits and arrivals. The van was white, generic, the kind that could belong to any service company. But Charlotte's stomach tightened immediately. She'd seen that van before. Written it down in her notebook as entry 15, her hand went to her right ear. 1 tap. Then her left shoulder. 3 taps. The new signal she'd worked out with Sarah? Highest priority. Something requires immediate attention. Sarah, positioned in the corridor outside, received the message. She immediately checked the building schedule on her tablet. No maintenance scheduled for today. No heating emergencies reported. She radioed it in. Possible unauthorized entry. White service van, northeast parking. Confirming with administration. The school administration confirmed. No maintenance scheduled. No emergency calls made. Sarah's training kicked in. All units, unauthorized maintenance worker, potentially on site, locate and verify credentials immediately. Inside the classroom, Charlotte couldn't hear the radio chatter, but she could see the sudden shift in security posture. Officers moving with purpose, the atmosphere changing from routine to alert. The maintenance worker had entered through the administration building. He was carrying a toolbox and clipboard. Everything looked legitimate, but he wasn't heading toward the heating systems. He was walking toward the main classroom wing, toward where George was in mathematics. Class Sarah intercepted him in the corridor. "Excuse me, sir? Can I see your work order and identification?" The man smiled pleasantly. "Of course. Emergency heating repair. Admin called it in this morning." He handed over a work order. It looked official. Company logo, job details, authorization, signature. But Sarah had been trained by Charlotte to look for details most people missed. The signature was illegible. The date stamp was off by 1 day. The company logo's colors were slightly wrong, as if printed from a downloaded image rather than official letterhead. "Sir, I need you to wait here while I verify this with the company." The man's pleasant expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A calculation. A decision being made in real time. "Of course. I'll just grab something from my van while you check." Turned back toward the exit. Walking, not running. Casual. But his hand went to his pocket. Sarah saw the outline of something that made her blood freeze. Not a weapon. Phone. And on that phone, potentially photos, videos, or data about royal movements and security protocols. "Sir, please wait here." He kept walking. "Just grabbing my tools. Be right back." Sarah made a split-second decision. She couldn't physically detain him without cause, but she could follow. She radioed ahead. "Subject heading to parking area. Do not let that van leave the premises." Security vehicles moved to block the exits. But the maintenance worker had reached his van. He climbed in, started the engine, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might try to ram his way out. Instead, he shut off the engine, placed his hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen, and waited. Smart. He knew he was caught. Now he was playing it safe, probably destroying evidence on his phone, even as he waited. Police arrived within 7 minutes. They found exactly what Charlotte's instincts had warned about. A man with false credentials, unauthorized access, attempts to multiple royal properties over 6 months, and a phone full of detailed notes about security patterns, shift changes, and family schedules. Not a terrorist, not an assassin. Something potentially worse. An information broker selling detailed intelligence about royal protection protocols to the highest bidder. The kind of information that could be used by anyone with malicious intent. Commander Harding arrived at the school within the hour. He found Sarah and Charlotte in the headmaster's office. Charlotte was pale but composed, drinking hot chocolate that someone had thoughtfully provided. "Princess Charlotte," Harding said, kneeling to her eye level. "I understand we have you to thank for stopping a significant security breach today." Charlotte shook her head. "I just saw the van. I remembered seeing it before. That's all. That's not all. You kept detailed records. You recognized patterns. You created a communication system that allowed you to alert security without causing panic. Those aren't small things. Is George okay? Your brother is fine. He never knew anything was wrong. Thanks to you? Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. I was so scared I was wrong. That everyone would think I was being paranoid again. Being cautious isn't the same as being paranoid. You've proven that you have exceptional situational awareness. But Charlotte, I need to ask you something. Why didn't you tell your parents about the van before today? Charlotte looked down at her hands. Because I only saw it 3 times, and it was always doing normal things. Fixing things at our house. Delivering something to the palace. I thought maybe it was just the same company that works on lots of buildings. I wasn't sure until I saw it here where it wasn't supposed to be. Harding nodded slowly. That's actually very good judgment. You gathered data. You looked for patterns. You only raised the alarm when those patterns indicated an actual anomaly. That's what trained analysts do, Sarah spoke up. Sir, with respect, she's 9 years old. This shouldn't be her responsibility. You're absolutely right. But the reality is that Princess Charlotte has developed these skills, either naturally or in response to her environment. We can't unteach her to be observant. We can only help her process what she observes in healthy ways. William and Catherine arrived shortly after. They'd been briefed on the situation. Catherine went directly to Charlotte, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. You're safe. George is safe. Everyone is safe. I'm sorry, Mummy. I know you don't want me to worry about these things. Oh, sweetheart. I don't want you to carry burdens that aren't yours to carry. But I'm so grateful for your awareness today. You protected your brother. William sat down next to them. Charlotte, I need to tell you something. When I was your age, I did similar things. I kept track of faces I saw repeatedly. I memorized security patterns. I thought I was just being anxious. But my protection officers told me years later that several times I'd identified people who were trying to get unauthorized access to us. Charlotte looked up at her father with surprise. Really? It's not unusual for children in our position to develop heightened awareness. The key is learning to live with that awareness without letting it control your life. Over the next week, the investigation into the maintenance worker revealed a broader conspiracy. He'd been gathering information from multiple clients, including tabloid journalists, but also some more concerning individuals with unclear motives. Thanks to Charlotte's documentation, authorities were able to trace back every location he'd accessed, every piece of information he'd gathered, and every person he'd sold that information to. It led to 3 arrests, the closure of an illicit information brokerage operation, and a complete overhaul of contractor verification procedures across all royal properties. But more importantly, it led to a conversation between Charlotte and George that had been years overdue. They were in their shared playroom at Adelaide Cottage. Louis was with Catherine, giving the older siblings time alone. George had finally been told the full story of what his sister had been doing. So you've been watching out for me this whole time? George asked. Charlotte nodded, unable to meet his eyes. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to be scared. Lottie, I'm not scared. I'm just... Why didn't you tell me? Because you're supposed to be able to just be normal. To play football and have fun and not worry about people watching us. One of us should get to be normal. George was quiet for a moment. But you're normal too. You're just normal and careful at the same time. And I'm sorry I didn't notice that you were carrying all this worry. It's not your fault. Maybe not. But from now on, if you see something that scares you, tell me. Not so I can fix it. Just so you don't have to be scared alone. Charlotte finally looked at her brother. Deal. They shook hands solemnly. Then George pulled her into a hug. Besides, you're not the only one who notices things. I've seen you checking exits everywhere we go. I've seen you counting security officers. I've seen you watching. I just thought that was normal for you. I didn't realize it was because you were trying to protect me. Is it weird that I do that? No weirder than me memorizing football statistics even though we'll never play professionally. Everyone has their thing. Yours is just more useful than most people's. That evening, Sarah found Charlotte in the garden with her notebook. But this time, she wasn't writing observations about suspicious individuals. She was writing a story, fiction, about a princess who could talk to animals and used that gift to help people. That's nice to see, Sarah said. Something just for fun. Charlotte smiled. Dr. Martinez said I should have things in my life that aren't about watching and worrying. She said 9-year-olds should spend some time being creative just because it's enjoyable. She's very smart, Officer Sarah. Thank you for believing me. About the van and the man and all of it. Thank you for not making me feel crazy. Charlotte, you were never crazy. You were observant, caring, and trying to protect someone you love. Those are good things. We just needed to help you carry them better. The security protocols around the Wales children were updated. But more importantly, Charlotte was given tools to process her observations in healthier ways. Regular check-ins with Dr. Martinez, a private channel to report concerns without feeling like she was bothering anyone, and most crucially, permission to sometimes just be a child who didn't have to notice everything. The notebook remained, but its entries changed. Still observant, still detailed, but mixed now with sketches, story ideas, normal 9-year-old concerns about upcoming tests and friendship dynamics. The code Charlotte had created remained too, but evolved. Not a burden carried in secret, but a skill used appropriately when needed, and set aside when it wasn't. And in the quiet moments, when Charlotte still found herself scanning exits and counting security officers, she remembered what her father had told her. This awareness wasn't a flaw. It was just part of who she was. A gift that came with responsibility, but one that didn't have to define every moment of her life. She could protect and be protected. Watch and be watched over. Be extraordinary and ordinary all at the same time. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same corridor at Lambrook School where she'd first noticed Charlotte's signals. Everything looked the same. Children moving between classes, teachers greeting students, the comfortable rhythm of an ordinary school day. But everything had changed. Charlotte still observed, still noticed details others missed. But now, when she saw something concerning, she didn't carry it alone. She'd signal Sarah. They'd assess it together. And most importantly, Charlotte had learned to distinguish between genuine threats and the normal irregularities of life. Last week, she'd noticed a photographer using a telephoto lens near the school. Instead of panic, she'd calmly signaled Sarah, who'd verified the person was a parent photographing their own child's sports day, cleared through proper channels. Charlotte had nodded, logged it mentally, and moved on. No anxiety spiral. No hours of worry. Just observation, verification, and release. Dr. Martinez called it progress. Sarah called it watching a child reclaim her childhood while keeping the gifts that made her special. Today was different, though. Today, Charlotte had asked Sarah for a private conversation during lunch break. They sat in a quiet corner of the library. Charlotte had her notebook, but this time, it wasn't about security concerns. Officer Sarah, I've been thinking about something. What's that? There are other children like me. Children who have to have security because their parents are important or famous or royal, and I bet some of them feel like I used to feel. Scared and responsible, and like they have to watch everything all the time. Sarah nodded slowly. You're probably right. Do you think someone could teach them what you and Dr. Martinez taught me? About how to notice things without being scared all the time? About how to help without carrying too much. That's a very thoughtful idea, Charlotte. What are you thinking? Charlotte opened her notebook to a page filled with careful notes. I wrote down all the things that helped me. The difference between real threats and normal life, how to signal adults without causing panic, how to be aware without being anxious. I thought maybe it could be a guide for other kids who feel like I did. Sarah felt emotion tighten her throat. You want to help other children feel safer? I want them to know they're not weird. That noticing things is okay, but they don't have to do it alone. Over the next few months, Charlotte's idea grew. Dr. Martinez worked with her to develop age-appropriate materials about situational awareness for high-profile children. Not fear-mongering, but practical. Empowering information delivered in ways that helped rather than frightened. William and Catherine were initially hesitant. This meant acknowledging publicly that their daughter had struggled with hypervigilance. But Charlotte insisted, It helps even one other kid feel less alone. Isn't it worth it? They couldn't argue with that. The program launched quietly. No press announcements. Just information made available through schools and security organizations that served high-profile families. Children of diplomats, corporate executives, celebrities, and minor royals. Kids who lived with security but rarely had anyone acknowledged the unique pressures that created. The response was overwhelming. Letters came from parents thanking Charlotte for putting into words what their children had been feeling. From children relieved to know others shared their experiences. One letter particularly moved Charlotte. It was from a 12-year-old girl whose mother was a prominent politician. I thought I was crazy for memorizing exits everywhere we went, for noticing people who showed up too often in different places, for lying awake worrying about my little sister's safety. Reading your guide helped me understand my brain wasn't broken. It was just trying to protect people I love. Thank you for being brave enough to share your story. Charlotte kept that letter in her notebook. Alongside her observations and sketches and story ideas at school, Charlotte had become known among her friends as the girl who noticed things. But instead of being weird, it had become useful. She could always find lost items by remembering where she'd last seen them. She could tell when someone was upset before they said anything. She could navigate unfamiliar places easily because she naturally mapped exits and landmarks. Her gift had been reframed. Not a burden, but a skill. George had learned to trust his sister's observations without being frightened by them. When Charlotte quietly said, "That person is watching us," he knew to stay close to security without panicking. Louis, now 6, had started to develop some of Charlotte's observational skills, but he approached them differently. Where Charlotte noticed threats, Louis noticed feelings. He could tell when adults were pretending to be happy but were actually worried. When his siblings needed space or comfort, different gifts. Same family, learning to navigate an unusual life together. One afternoon, Sarah found Charlotte in the garden at Adelaide Cottage, writing in her notebook. She was laughing at something she'd written. "Good day," Sarah asked. "Really good day. Want to hear something funny?" "Always." George got in trouble today for passing notes in class. The teacher thought he was being disruptive, but he was actually using the signal system we developed to tell his friend that the teacher's shoe was untied. She was about to trip over it. Sarah laughed. Did it work? Perfectly. His friend coughed loudly to get the teacher's attention, and she looked down and fixed her shoe before she fell. George got detention anyway, but he said it was worth it. Your brother is learning from you. You were learning from each other. He's teaching me that not everything needs to be analyzed and categorized. Sometimes you can just enjoy the moment. Catherine appeared on the terrace. "Charlotte, darling, Grandpa is on the phone. He wants to hear about your school project." Charlotte brightened and ran inside. Sarah remained in the garden, thinking about the journey she'd witnessed. A 9-year-old girl who'd been carrying the weight of her family's safety on her shoulders had learned to share that weight, to process it healthily, and ultimately to use her gifts to help others. That evening, William invited Sarah to join the family for dinner. It was unusual for protection officers to be included in family meals, but the Wales family had never been conventional about boundaries with the people who protected them. Over dinner, Louis was telling an elaborate story about his day at school. George was teasing Charlotte about a boy in her class who apparently had a crush on her. Charlotte was blushing and throwing bread rolls at her brother. Normal, chaotic, loving. William caught Sarah's eye and smiled. This was what they'd been fighting for. Not perfect safety, because that didn't exist. But normal moments, childhood, laughter without fear, overshadowing every interaction. After dinner, it had become their routine. A moment to check in, to decompress, to ensure Charlotte was processing everything healthily. "How are you really doing?" Sarah asked. Charlotte thought about it. "I still notice things. I probably always will. But it doesn't scare me like it used to. And I know that if something really worries me, you'll take it seriously. That makes all the difference." "I'll always take you seriously, Charlotte, always." "I know. That's why I can relax now. I don't have to be perfect at keeping everyone safe because I'm not doing it alone." 6 months after that, Sarah received a promotion. She would remain connected to the Wales family, but would also help develop new training protocols for officers protecting high-profile children. Protocols informed by everything she'd learned from Charlotte. On her last day as Charlotte's primary detail, Sarah brought the princess a gift, a leather-bound journal with observations and adventures embossed on the cover. "For your important notes," Sarah said, "and for your stories? Both kinds of observation matter." But Charlotte hugged her tightly. "Thank you for understanding me. For not making me feel broken." "You were never broken. Just extraordinary in ways that take time to understand." Years later, Charlotte would look back on this period as the time she learned that strength doesn't mean carrying everything alone, that asking for help isn't weakness, that gifts can be both blessing and burden, and learning to balance them is part of growing up. She continued to notice things, to see patterns, to be aware. But she also learned to dance, to laugh without looking over her shoulder, to trust that the adults around her were capable of protecting her family. She learned that being observant was part of who she was, but it didn't have to be all of who she was. George grew up grateful for his sister's watchful care, but also aware that she'd paid a price for it. He made sure she knew she was valued not just for what she did for others, but for who she was. Funny, creative, stubborn, kind, Louis grew up in a family that had learned the hard way how to balance protection with freedom. He benefited from their hard-won wisdom. And William and Catherine learned that their children were more capable and more vulnerable than they'd imagined. That protecting them meant both keeping them safe and letting them develop their unique gifts, even when those gifts came with complicated emotions. Sarah continued her work with high-profile families. She carried with her the lessons she'd learned from a 9-year-old princess. That children are often more perceptive than adults give them credit for. That their fears deserve respect, even when those fears seem disproportionate. That teaching children to be aware doesn't mean stealing their innocence if done with care and wisdom. And Charlotte, she kept her notebooks, kept observing, kept noticing things others missed. But she also wrote stories, played with friends, argued with her brothers, and slowly learned that she could be both vigilant and carefree, both watchful and watched over, both protector and protected. The code she'd created evolved over the years. Sometimes she used it. Sometimes she didn't need it. But knowing it existed, knowing she could communicate concerns without words, gave her a sense of control in an often uncontrollable life. On her 13th birthday, Charlotte received a letter from the young girl who'd written to her years earlier, the politician's daughter. "I'm in high school now. I still notice things, but it doesn't consume me anymore. Last week I actually helped security catch someone who was trying to steal from lockers. My observational skills are useful, not just anxious. Thank you for showing me that this part of me could be a strength. You changed my life." Charlotte added that letter to her collection, a reminder that vulnerability shared becomes strength, that gifts acknowledged become bearable, that no one has to be extraordinary alone. She looked out her window at the gardens of Adelaide Cottage. Security officers, visible in the distance, George playing football nearby, Louis reading under a tree, safe, protected, but also free. The balance they'd all fought so hard to find. Charlotte picked up her journal, the one Sarah had given her years ago, half filled with observations, half with stories and sketches, and normal 13-year-old concerns. She wrote a single line. "Today I noticed the sunset. Not because I was watching for threats, just because it was beautiful." And she closed the journal and went outside to join her brothers, to be a sister, to be a child, to be herself in all her complicated, observant, extraordinary, and perfectly normal glory. The code remained, a language of protection, of love, of sibling devotion that no threat could ever break. But it was no longer a burden carried in fear. It was a gift, shared with wisdom, used with care, and balanced with the simple joy of being young. And that, Sarah thought, as she watched the family from a distance in her new role, was the real victory. Not perfect safety, not the elimination of all threats, but a child who'd learned that being vigilant and being happy weren't mutually exclusive, that you could notice dangers and still see sunsets, that protecting others didn't mean sacrificing yourself. That was what they'd all been fighting for all along.